turn there because I'm not going to stay there. It says, the Lord said to Joshua, and then thou shalt have good success. Brother Brown, are you going to Korea to have success or to fail? Did you get married to fail, or did you get married to have a successful marriage? Do you go to work on a job hoping you'll fail, or do you want to have success? There are three elements involved in success, whether it's success secular or success spiritually. One is what I call want to. People are not going to be successful if they don't want to. Our Olympics have closed now, but all of those men and women who competed in the Olympics wanted all their life, most of them, to do what they're doing. They have sacrificed, they've trained, they've watched their diet, they've done all sorts of things so they could go and be successful in whatever event that they have chosen. Isn't that right? But the first element is want to. I believe every born-again believer is instilled with a want to when they're saved. Amen. Now, they may lose that want to the next day because of sin or because of doubt, but I believe when you're saved, there comes a want to in your heart for God. Sure. I can tell you, when I got saved that next Sunday, I wanted to go to church. Yeah. And that night, I wanted to begin to read the Bible. I wanted to. It wasn't that I had to force myself to go like I used to. I wanted to. And you know, you can be so careless with your want to. The devil's after your want to. Right. Because your want to is what motivates you. Right. If you don't want to give, you're not going to give. If you don't want to be in church faithfully, you're not going to be in church faithfully. But if you want to, and you really want to, you'll do it, because people do what they want to. Brother Henderson's a deer hunter. I'm not. $600 for a rifle with a big scope on it. Ladder to get up in the tree and assassinate that poor little deer when it comes by. Get that thing and it stinks and you got to hang it up and gut it and you got to clean it up and take it home. You know, why does he do that? Because he wants to. Amen. You heard about Joe and Bill, didn't you? They were standing outside the beauty shop and Joe said to Bill, last week my wife came in here and it was $35. And Bill said, well, Joe, that's not bad this day and time. He said, no, you don't understand. I said, that was just for the estimate, he said. I have a pastor friend. His wife has a standing appointment for 20 years. Every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock, she gets her hair done. You know how much that adds up in a year's time? Why does she do that? Because she wants to. Am I right? Yeah. Want to is precious, especially spiritual want to. The devil's out to get your want to, because the second element in success is how to. You can have want to, but not know how to. It's my intention to share with you sometime in this meeting about how to give faith promise, the biblical way to arrive at an amount and how to do it. But listen to me, how to is not worth a hoot if you don't have want to. We have ladies in our church that are into quilting. We have a lady that is saving money to buy a $1,200 embroidery machine. And then she's got to learn how to operate it. Do you know I'm not the least bit interested in that? I don't have any want to operate an embroidery machine. If they're having a seminar, they're going to tell you how to do that. I wouldn't go. You know why some people don't go to church? Because they don't want to. If they really wanted to, they would arrange their schedule. They would do whatever they had to do to be in church. Because the Bible says you're to be there. Yeah. But they don't want to. And preachers, we spend our ministry many times preaching to people who have no want to. We're trying to tell them how to live right, how to live godly, how to be successful in your Christian life, and they sit there like bumps on a log because they don't want to live any differently than they're living. So how to is not much good without want to. And then the third thing that's the key element in success is follow through. You got to stay with it. Yes. I'm telling you, years ago, my pastor preached, when I was first saved, he preached a series of sermons on tithing. God must have been in it, because in one of those Sunday morning services had a woman get saved, and he preached on tithing. You know God had to be in that. That fellow shook his fist at my pastor and said he wasn't going to do it, but it arrested my heart. And my wife and I went home one Sunday, and we began to talk about it. And we were discussing how we could tithe. And we decided we couldn't tithe. And being the spiritual giant I am, I said to her, well, honey, we'll just wait till we can afford it, and then we'll tithe. Isn't that spiritual? Isn't that setting a good example? But I went to bed, and I couldn't sleep. I got to thinking about that dog we had, a dog named Patches. We'd been driving out of our subdivision one cold winter day, and somebody had thrown the little puppy out in the ditch. And the kids saw it. You know, we're going to pick it up and take it to the Humane Society. You know how that goes. Once they got their hands on that puppy and it whined a time or two, that puppy ended up at our house. But I was tough on that old dog. I wouldn't feed that dog food. I'd feed her whatever we had left over. And as I lay there that night, God said to me, that's just what you're doing to me. You're just giving me your leftovers. And the bad part is it was right. If I had a good week at work, I'd put an extra 20 in the offering plate. If it was a tough week, I'd roll a $1 bill up and sort of slide it down the plate. Just giving God what I had left over. I got up that next Sunday morning and I said to my wife, honey, write that check. We're going to begin to tithe. Even though we had decided we couldn't afford to tithe. We're going to do what's right. I believe that God will take care of us. Amen. And I had a want to tithe. Amen. The preacher had told me how to, but we had to follow through. Boy, you think when you begin to give to God and you begin to tithe, your financial worries are over. God had to burn it into my heart that I had to be a good steward of what He entrusted me with. I had to get my finances straightened out. I had to stop spending money on things that I had spent money on in order to be able to give a full tenth of what I was making to the Lord. And it was a troubling time. But I want to tell you this, we followed through. That year was a difficult year. When you have to go get money out of your child's piggy bank to get a gallon of gas to make it to work, that's pretty tough. We never didn't pay our bills. Even when I was unsaved, we paid our bills. But it was tough. But God, through that time, burned it in my soul. I said, Lord, whatever I got to learn in this mess, let me learn it. I don't want to go through it again. I couldn't even buy a Coca-Cola at work some weeks. The kids would want to go somewhere, we couldn't go. We didn't take a vacation. I sometimes had to go to work and not eat anything until I got home. We had to buy clothes for the kids and clothes for my wife. And everybody had to have everything. And I just wore that same old green suit that fit about like that. A little boy at church one day said to me, Mr. Jackson, why do you wear that same old green suit all the time? I said, son, it's because it's the only one I got. I was low man on the totem pole. But what I'm trying to say, we followed through. We got through that. And man, it's been over 40 years that we've enjoyed the blessings of God. Amen. I mean, it's been a joy to give. It's been a joy to give above the tithe. We began by just giving the tithe. But we learned that God wanted us to do more than that. And as we did that, God blessed us more and more. And I tell you the truth, if I found a verse that said don't tithe, I think I'd skip it. Because it's been such a blessing to me. And it will be to you to give above that. God gives to you. Amen. And He'll help you if you have the right attitude. So my question is, do you want to do more? Preacher, if I could do more, I would do more. I want to. That's important for success. Now that was the introduction. at the church where I'm at, they laugh at me because often when I preach, I never get past the introduction. And I just have to give the extra points, and it's time to go eat. At our church, we eat a meal every Sunday. We have a carry-in lunch every Sunday. And so we're growing the church more than one way. That's the bad part. I want to try to be a help and a blessing. And I want to talk about something that if you don't want to do it, it's just going to aggravate you. You'll think of some excuse. You'll think of numerous reasons why you can't give anymore. And it'll aggravate you that I'm talking about giving. But I'm not trying to aggravate you. I'm trying to help you. I know what it is to sit where you are. I know what it is to struggle to pay the bills. I know what it is not to have extra money. And as a pastor, I have sat with people, especially ladies who wanted to give, but their husbands wouldn't let them give. Yeah. They didn't have control of the money. And he said, no, you're not giving any more to that church, and things like that. I know all the things that people go through, but I also know what the Bible says. I know the blessing. Give and it shall be what? Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive. I enjoy receiving, but I enjoy giving. It's a blessing to give. So the Bible has two divisions in giving. There's home giving and there's away giving. We used to play football, and I had a little league baseball team and a junior high school football team, and my brother and I played on an adult baseball team, an adult league, and on the scoreboard it always had home and away. Isn't that right? Well, giving is home and away. There is giving that is for this church. How do you think these walls got here and these pews got here? I know some other people probably helped you. I think we did. I don't know. I know we helped Brother Shepherd. We helped many others. Brother Henderson has helped me. I still have a computer that he gave me years ago. Their church gave me in a missions conference. They asked me, did you have any needs? And I was trying to think, we've been so blessed. I said, well, we don't have a computer. They went out and bought me a laptop and gave it to me. And that was when laptops didn't cost $200 or $300. It cost a good bit of money. It's been a blessing. It's been a joy. But it's also a joy to give. And you cannot have this church and maintain this church and pay your pastor unless there are people who have a giving to the home. You see, if this church dies, all the missionaries you support are going to lose their support. It's important that they be giving to the church. Amen. I believe the tithe belongs to the local church. I believe it's for the upkeep and the maintenance of the local church. It's not wrong to give some of that to missionaries if you choose to do that, but we chose not to do that where we're at. We give by faith promise to the missionaries. We give whatever can give by what the people give extra above their tithe. And the Bible talks about there is giving that is for the home. Look at Acts chapter number 2. I know that I'll not get finished, but I'll plug in tomorrow maybe. Acts chapter number 2 is the beginning of the church as such. I know there's a big argument about when the church started. I really don't think it matters all that much. Amen. It's here. It's not a fundamental of faith. My view is you can be wrong if you want to. Look in chapter number 2. And verse number 41, then they that gladly received his word, talking about Peter and his preaching, were baptized, and the same day there were added in them about 3,000 souls. You know the story. These were souls, primarily they had come from distant places. 17 different countries are listed. And these people were Jews by their religious preference, and they'd come there for the Passover. They didn't intend to stay. They didn't have the money or the means or the clothes, and they had to leave their jobs or whatever, take a leave of absence, and they were there. And when they got saved, they didn't want to leave. They had no spiritual place to go to, and so they stayed around Jerusalem. And guess what? They had to eat. They had to have a place to stay. They had the normal requirements of life, and they had no income. And when the money they brought with them began to run out. Somebody had to help them. Look what it says a little bit further down, if you would, in verse number 44. And all that believed were together and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men as every man had need. This is not communism, where they say they take the money and divide it up. They gave it out as they had need. That means there were some people there that didn't need anything, so they didn't get anything. They were the giving crowd. They had money, they had property, and they brought that money, gave it to the apostles, and they did what was necessary to meet the needs of the people in that congregation, in that place. So this is not giving to go away from the church. It is giving in the church. And you do that. It's obvious you do. I realize somebody paid for what we're eating. Right. Whether the church paid for all of it or you paid for it and cooked it and brought it, somebody did. Somebody paid for the napkins and for the chairs we eat on and chairs we sit on, the tables we eat on. I realize that as a pastor. You have to have giving that is for this local church. Look with me, if you look over to chapter number 4 and verse number 32. We're talking about home giving now. Giving is a biblical principle, but there's two major kinds of giving. Giving for home and giving for away. Look at verse 32. And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither said they any of them that all of the things which he possessed was his own. Uh-oh. But they had all things common. They wanted to help, to the extent they were willing to give what was theirs in order for others to have their needs met. Am I talking to people who have that kind of a spirit? The local church, every church, ought to have that kind of an attitude. We're a family. I just preached the other day. There are people in Anamosa, Iowa that talk about that church. Yeah, that one down there. That church that's in the old doctor's facility there. That church. And there's people who talk about the church that's down on Main Street. But for us, it is my church. Amen. It is where my heart is. It is where I serve the Lord at. It's not just a church or that church. It is my church. This is your church right here in the place that's needful. What better place for a light than in a dark place? Amen. There are good people in Nebraska. I don't doubt that. They're good people. But may I remind you that good people will go to hell. Right. You're not going to go to heaven because you're good. You're going to go to heaven if you go because of the goodness of Jesus Christ, that it's imputed to you and I who are the sinners. So they had all things common. And of course the tithe, bring you the tithe into the storehouse. You know all of that. Secondly, there is away giving. Look in Acts chapter number 11. But this is an away giving that is evidently a one-time offering for a special need. Acts chapter 11 and verse number 29. I'll start with 28. And there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit, and is capitalized by the Spirit of the Lord, that there should be a dearth, or should be a famine, should be a need. Probably because of lack of rain. It could be other reasons. But throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, look at this now, every man according to his ability. There are people in this room that have more ability than others, because there's people in this room that have more money than others. There's people in this room who are better at managing their money than others. There's people in this room that have better abilities. I knew a man one time that lost everything down in Florida and moved up to Georgia, and he got a job, went to work, came to the church, got saved. His wife got saved, his kids got saved, and they went back down to Florida with no money hardly at all. And I went to visit him about a year or so later, and he was living in a new house. He went there, and he bought a bunch of strawberries and put a kid on every corner that he could selling strawberries. Then he added tomatoes to it. And in the meantime, he didn't know anything about concrete, but he got into the building these quad houses where there's 4 houses on one big slab of concrete. And he got to be the middleman of booking that concrete and sending it over there to the builders and whatnot. And he was making money hand over fist. He's the kind of fellow you throw him out somewhere, he's going to find a way to make some money. I'm not like that. I'm expert at losing money. I listened to a fellow one time. He said, here's what you need to do. You need to invest in this company and this company. We didn't have much to invest, but we took a couple of $1,000s and invested it into this. I lost it. But there are people who have different abilities. Look what he said. They gave according to their abilities, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judah. So this is a one-time offering because of an emergency situation. I had this happen, not very often, but there was a church in Cedar Rapids, good independent Baptist church, and an old building, roof was going bad, and they were struggling to put the roof on, and our little church back years ago sent them $500 to help on their roof. The next Sunday, we got a $28,000 offering. And I thought, my stars, why didn't we send them $1,000? God doesn't do that all the time, but He does it when it suits Him.
Amen. You're right.
So this is talking about giving a special offering. But then there is another method of giving that is for others. I'm going to shock you, you missionaries too. I'm going to shock you by saying that faith promise giving in the Bible was not for missions. It was not. It was for others. But it was for the poor saints in Jerusalem who had a need, an ongoing need of having money sent to them. It's not wrong to apply it to missions. It's obvious when you look at the history of faith promise giving for missions, it's been a tremendous blessing. I would not be here today if it were not for faith promise giving and the people who give. And missionaries, could I just stop and say something to you? Stop going to churches to get money.
Right.
You need to have an attitude change.
Yep.
The one thing that you are in charge of is your attitude.
Amen.
I was not in charge of what height I would be, but with a mother 6 foot and a dad 6'3", I wasn't going to be short. I didn't choose to have this color hair. There's a lot of things I'm not in charge of. If I was in charge of the government, we wouldn't pay for any more abortions.
Amen.
But I'm not in charge. I'm not in charge of the weather. I'm not in charge of a lot of things. But there's one thing I'm in charge of and you're in charge of, and that is your attitude.
Amen.
And when I became a missionary, I had to change my attitude. And here's what I decided in my heart. I just wanted to go and be a blessing. And I didn't expect those churches to support me or meet my need. I expected God to do that.
Amen.
God called me and He'll supply my need if I'll just be a blessing. Amen. So I stopped thinking, well, I could get 50 here, 100 there. I'd be this percentage. I just went to be a blessing. And when I called pastors, I didn't ask for them to support me. I just said, brother, can I be a blessing to you? Would you let me have a Sunday school class? Would you let me speak to the children's church? I don't care. I don't want to take your service from you. Just let me have somewhere I can speak to people about the burden God's given me. I spoke down in South Georgia at a children's church. There's probably 30 kids in there, and they'd been saving their pennies and dimes and quarters for over a year. Some, they brought out a jug full of money and gave it to me. More than I would have got if I'd have spoken the main service.
Yeah.
But I didn't care. That's not what I went there for. I went there to give something.
Yeah.
I went there to be a blessing to them. I went there to try to help them to see the need of the world and to be a blessing. And I know I'm not criticizing. I know what you have to do. I had a slide presentation. I think I showed it twice. What missionaries need to do is preach. What pastors are looking for is somebody who will preach.
Yep.
I don't mean you straighten them out. You just share your burden of what God's called you to do.
Right.
I won't charge you for that. It's on the side. But I know missionaries that need a attitude change. Well, I'm not done. I'm going to share something else with you. Brother Henderson's put his 2 cents worth in, and I agree with everything he said. But I'm going to tell you missionaries something. I'm going to tell us missionaries something. We really ought to have to go to work at Walmart for a year about every 5 years. Because you forget the real world and what people go through just to be sitting in the church where you are. You forget that, you're trying to raise $50,000 or whatever you're trying to raise, and many of them are living on far less than that. And they don't understand all the ins and outs of going to a foreign field where you don't know how to save money yet, where you don't have housing, and where it's difficult in a lot of different ways. They don't understand all that, but when they hear you say you're trying to raise $3,000, $4,000 a month, man. Yeah. Whatever they do after they worked on their job. They do after they've gone through other things. And it'd probably do us good just to have to be the doorman at Walmart for about a year. Sure. Every 5 years. And by the way, full-time pastors, it wouldn't hurt them either.
You're right.
They forget. Down in Georgia, he knows they call them stall-fed preachers. They don't work and start a church. So there's giving that is for home giving. There's giving that is for going away. Look in Galatians chapter number 2. If you would. The Apostle Paul was the missionary to the Gentiles. He didn't ask to be. As well as I can remember, he said to the Lord after he was saved, Lord, what will thou have me to do? Now, if it had been you and I, we'd have picked Peter to go to the Gentiles, and we'd have sent Paul to the Jews. Because Paul had all the Jewish training and background, but Paul became the missionary to the Gentiles. And when he was leaving Jerusalem, after he'd met with James and Peter and John and the others who were there, they gave him some instructions. I had a man come to my church, and he was seeking support, but he never said that, and he was proud of the fact that he had never, ever presented a need to anybody. George Mueller was like that. But the New Testament Christians were not like that. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying it's not wrong either to make known a need. So the church at Jerusalem told Paul, when you go out and start these Gentile churches, you tell them to remember the poor saints in Jerusalem. He didn't command them to do that, but he asked them to. Look at Galatians chapter 2 and verse number 10. Only they, talking about the leadership in Jerusalem, would or wanted or let us know that we should remember the poor. We'll see later in Romans 15, he's talking about the poor saints in Jerusalem. The same which I also was forward to do. So Paul went in, started these churches, and he made known the need of the poor saints in Jerusalem. It's not wrong to make a need known. It is wrong, I think, to forget to teach the people you're starting with not to tithe. Right. You need to teach them that they have a responsibility to give. You need to teach them the blessing of giving. You need to teach them the biblical foundation for giving. You're robbing them of a blessing if you don't teach them to give. And give gladly. I know some people don't like it, but it's still the truth. Look at Romans chapter 15. I'm going to get a little bit further. I'm as hungry as you are, and I know the only thing between us and eating is me. Romans chapter 15. He said in verse 25, But now I go unto Jerusalem to minister unto the saints. For it hath pleased them of Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor saints, which are at Jerusalem. Look at the reasoning he has. It hath pleased them verily, and their debtors they are. For if the Gentiles have been made partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister unto them in carnal things. When therefore I have performed this, and have sealed to them this fruit, I will come by you into Spain. You understand what he's saying? He's saying it's only right that you Gentiles help the poor saints in Jerusalem, because the gospel first sounded out from Jerusalem. Isn't that right? Yes, sir. On the day of Pentecost and afterwards, the church in Jerusalem was the only church. But out of that church went these men and women who started other churches, and out of that came Paul and Barnabas and the others who were sent out to go around to Gentile people and to preach the gospel. I know they went into the synagogue first. But they often got thrown out of the synagogues. Right. They were not welcome there because they were preaching that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah, and these people were still waiting for the Messiah. So it wasn't long until they were out on the street, or they were meeting somewhere down by the riverside. By the way, you missionaries, don't get discouraged. When Paul had that Macedonian call, that fellow said, come over here and help us. When he got there, that fellow wasn't there. He found a few women down by the riverside in a prayer meeting. Yeah. Am I right? Yeah. Now, wait a minute. Some people would have been so discouraged they got on the plane and went back home. You're right. If that's all I can do is just have a few women down by the river. And they got thrown in jail. Things didn't go well. But the Philippian jailer got saved. Things went a little better. You see, it's not the results. Nowhere in the Bible that I've ever found did Jesus ever commend anybody because of the size of the crowd. You're right. Or how many souls they won to Christ. None of that. None of that. He did not ever condemn or belittle any small congregation. Right. Nor did he say what a wonderful job when there was a large congregation. It's not about those things. It's about being faithful to your call and your place. Amen. If God's called you to go to Timbuktu, go to Timbuktu and do what God wants you to do and stay there until you get it done. Amen. Regardless of the results. Yes. Preach to your own family if you have to. They need it anyway. Yeah. I just told my wife and kids that day they didn't give as much as I thought they ought to. And they didn't. But they got better. So he said these four saints at Jerusalem. Look in, if you would, in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, just a few pages over. And you'll see the method that Paul used to instruct these churches about giving to the poor saints in Jerusalem. And later we'll see in the books of 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, he rehearses how he taught them the principle of faith promise giving. Faith promise is not a principle, it is a method of giving. And it is not the only method of giving. We've seen that they collected an offering, a one-time offering to help the famine relief that was going on in Jerusalem. But there's also the method of faith promise giving, which has been such a blessing to many people because you don't have to give it all at one time. You get to give it over a period of time. I don't know about you, but I have had faith promises that I didn't have the money to sit down and write a check for that entire amount for the whole year. I've known people who did, and there are people who do that. Right. But I couldn't do that. I'd have to go take what we got out of the bank to do it now. When I surrendered to missions, my tithe, my faith promise was larger than my tithe. And when I made that last radio broadcast, when we were moving out of the pastorium into that travel trailer, I was walking to my car and a voice said in me, "What you going to do about that faith promise now? You don't have any money." And I didn't. We didn't have enough support to even pay the payment on the travel trailer that we'd bought. But something on the other side said to me, "Didn't you pray about that? Didn't you ask God before you made that promise?" Yeah. Man, I was probably less spiritual than your pastor and you folks. I had a faith promise card. I had changed the amount of it so many times I nearly wore a hole through it. But we settled just between her and I and God that we were going to give this amount of money until the next September at the missions conference. But I lost my income during that time. I didn't know what I was going to do. And something on this side said, "Didn't you pray about that?" Well, what am I going to say? Yes, I prayed about that. Then what's the problem then? Go ahead and keep giving. And for the rest of that year, while we were on deputation, we were able to keep our faith promise and never missed a time. Amen. Praise the Lord. Did you have to do without? Oh, yeah. I went up in the North Georgia mountains to the deadest, coldest church I think I've ever been in. There was about a half a dozen people there, and they was mad at one another. And I tried to preach, and about 15 minutes was all I could stand. And we dismissed. It was an early service at 6 o'clock, and we started down out of there. My son was about 7 years old. He said, "Daddy, can we stop at Dairy Queen?" That church had not given me an offering. They hadn't said thank you, kiss my foot, or nothing. I said, son, Daddy doesn't have any money. We can't stop at the Dairy Queen. We were coming through Cleveland, Georgia. Beautiful red brick church. The lights were all on, and people were going in. I guess it was 7:30. And I said, honey, why don't we just stop and go worship God? So we pulled in the parking lot, went up, and I started up the steps, and somebody called my name. He said, hey, Don. And I turned around and looked, and it was a guy named Kenneth that I'd gone to high school with. He said, man, what are you doing up here? And I told him. I said, what are you doing up here? Well, I got married, and my wife's from here, so we live here. And then we went on in, and when I came out of the service, we started down the steps. I heard him again. I said, hey, Don. He walked up and handed me a $20 bill. Said, the Lord told me to give you that. I told my son we're stopping at Dairy Queen. And that didn't happen just once. But it happened. All these missionaries have stories like that. God will take care of you if you'll do God's will and you're willing to suffer if necessary. Right. I mean, stop spending money that you don't have to spend. Yeah. If you have to use the credit card, that's one thing. But if you just use it to do things that you don't have to do, that's foolish. Right. That debt is like a weight hanging around you. It ought to be your goal as a missionary, your goal as a pastor, your goal as a church member, that you'll get debt free. Yes. So that you're free to use the money as God wants you to do it. You say, preacher, you're talking foolishness. No. I may be talking a 10-year endeavor for some people, but it can be done because we've done it. Was it easy? No, we had to quit spending money. We took the credit cards and took a pair of scissors and cut them up. Sears was plumb upset. J.C. Penney nearly went out of business. But we quit. We learned to live on what we had, and we learned to be that way. And so he said in verse number 1 of 1 Corinthians chapter number 16. Now concerning the collection for the saints. Which saints? The poor saints in Jerusalem. He says, as I have given order or given instruction, it's not a command that he's given to them. It is not by commandment, but it's by grace. He says to the churches of Galatia. Galatia is one of the big provinces in what's now modern day Turkey. Even so do ye. Notice this now. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store. Now, why would they have to do that? Well, they didn't have the banking system we have. They didn't have checks, and they didn't have a mail service that could get something there in a day or two. They couldn't go down to Walmart like I've done for my family. My son got really sick and was out of work, and he needed money. And when I found out about it, I went over to Walmart, and in 35 minutes, he had the money. Right. From Anamosa to Georgia. I put the money in, they sent it, he got the money out. They couldn't do that. The only way to get money from one place to another was physically carry the money. Right. And so they were saving this money up until somebody came to collect it. Can you imagine the discipline? If you were given $10 a week, well, after 25 weeks, you'd have $250 there in your house. Boy, it would be a temptation if you weren't careful to, we're a little short this week. Let's just borrow 50 from over here. But they were instructed to put that money aside until Paul or someone came by to pick it up. But notice when they were to do it, he says upon the first day of the week, which is what? Sunday. What is the seventh day of the week? I dropped it. Thank you, son. The seventh day of the week is on a Saturday. And he said in verse number 4, as God has prospered him, there be no gatherings when I come. I have been in camp meetings and I have been in churches where you are lambasted to death till you gave everything there was. I was tempted just to give them a credit card so I could get out of there. But he didn't want that. He wanted them to systematically give a certain amount of money, whatever they decided to give, but to give it consistently, to want to how to follow through, to give it consistently. The key verse for faith promise giving, 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse number 8. You're to settle it between you and God.
Amen.
Whatever God asks you to do, He'll help you to do. It's not wrong to sit down and look at your finances and see what you could possibly do. But you don't need to give everything you could give. You need to seek God to see what He wants you to give out of what you have. Or what you don't have. You may not think it's possible for you to give the amount of money that's on your heart, but if God asks you to, He'll help you to do it. He'll give you grace to do it. So He says in that verse number 3, and when I come, whomsoever ye shall approve by your letters, them will I send to bring your liberality, or the offering, or the money given unto Jerusalem. You send money off to a TV preacher, you don't know what's going to be done with that money. They're on there. One of the really famous ones flies around in a Lear jet, personal private jet. I went to Oklahoma City, and while I was there, the pastor carried me on a tour of the pastoriums, the houses where pastors of certain churches in that town lived. The governor's mansion in Georgia wasn't as nice as some of those homes were. God's not against having nice things. But you know, Paul said, be content with such things as you have. You can live in a little less house and do a little more for the work of God. We live, and I'm not bragging or complaining, we live in a double wide. What's wrong with that? It's a home. Hey, I'm not building a mansion down here. I got one going on up there. I have a comfortable place to live. It has air conditioning. My wife fixes me food there. She's able to get around there. And by the way, we paid for it because it's a used double wide. Maybe you say, I'm not going to live in a trailer. Well, okay. But because we do that, we have more money to give, and we're freer to do things for the Lord than we ought to. I know I'm meddling now. I'm like that woman that was in the camp meeting, revival service, and the preacher was just getting on everything, and she was amening him until he got on dip and snuff.